Hello everybody, today I am going to be reviewing Joker. This film was written and directed by Todd Phillips and co-written by Scott Silver. This film has a lot of controversy that it's created since its release, and I'm not really sure exactly why or what people are angry about. It seems like it might have something to do with like violence or the glamorization of violence, of villainy. Perhaps it's the cynicism, I'm not quite sure, but it's great for ticket sales. It's good for, getting your film out there and all that. But for me, watching the film, the controversy of it to me is not as interesting of a thing to discuss, because I think in order to stir controversy, the film needs to be interesting to begin with. And for me, it is not. I am not gonna lie to you, I really struggled to get through this movie. When it was over, I kind of just had this feeling of just like, ugh, where do I begin? I'll start with, I guess, what I initially felt while I was in the theater, and as soon as the credits started rolling. My knee-jerk reaction was that this film, it felt like just a really bad date. It felt like, it just rubbed me the wrong way the entire time. I can't recall a single moment in the film, really, that had any ounce of dignity or that felt like it was made with genuine intentions. It is a very hollow film, and it's kind of excessively showboating a lot of its themes and aesthetic at the surface to the point where it's like, it's nauseating. And you might be thinking, well, of course, this is supposed to be a very dark film, a grim film that should bring you to the point of nausea. True, but when I'm talking about nausea, I'm talking about it more from kind of behind the scenes, more the nuts and bolts, the structure of the film. Because for me, watching this film, for all of its ranting and raving on all kinds of different things it's touching upon, this kind of social politics and nihilism, mental health, anarchy, and the philosophy behind amorality, all of that, it has little to offer, I think, the viewers that gives us something to truly chew on when it comes to all of those ideas. This film just reeks of pretension from almost every point of view when it comes to creating, an interesting character study about somebody in particular that is very mentally unstable. There are a lot of ways to go about that. Todd Phillips obviously wanted to go more for the influence of the 1970s Scorsese films. But this particular version is very unsatisfying as a character arc, because it is hammering its metaphors and its plot points, its manipulative devices in a way that causes the anti-hero archetype to feel muddled and soggy rather than nuanced. Todd Phillips, of course, is the man behind the one of the cinematic great franchises, the Hangover series. But when it comes to Joker as a film, part of me applauds him for having real audacity and ambition to take on a project like this, but I can't feel too much admiration. A, because the film just does not come together in any sort of way for me, and B, because it feels, like I said, not very genuine. It feels like a giant marketing ploy to stir controversy, to garner Academy Award nominations. What this is what I described earlier. Very, very, very heavily influenced by 1970s films, particularly Scorsese vehicles. And this film is basically a companion piece, a ripoff of Taxi Driver, and of course, King of Comedy. You're creating a modern day of Travis Bickle that works more for the millennial age, but it's reworked to fit a very marketable idea. In this case, it is personifying all of those ideas and putting them into a character like the Joker. Of course, a notorious and iconic comic book archetype, and perhaps one of the most fascinating and most popular comic book villains of all time. But the thing is, Taxi Driver is a good movie. That's the big difference here. And when you're making a film that is trying so hard to recreate a film like that is about somebody who is probably mentally ill and is having this psychological descent into madness, I think you need to know what you're doing. I'd say that Joker captured aspects of it. It captured the dread and kind of the coiled pain within the character and all of that, but none of the intrigue or the exploration. It seems to be more interested, I think, in creating moments that disturb. And the aesthetic, too, is very important to them, clearly. It's really capturing kind of that gritty and grimy kind of neon look with, it's very, there's graffiti everywhere, and it's like rat infested, all this stuff, just trying to create a kind of a dark New York or Gotham. No, this is New York. Same with when we're watching The Dark Knight. I was like, no, that's not Gotham, it's Chicago. What makes Travis Bickle compelling as an anti-hero in Taxi Driver is that we don't understand him, and we're always trying to understand where he's going to go and what he's going to do. But he is slowly unraveling. But he begins at a certain point and then makes that downward spiral happen. And the tension constantly increases for us. I'm not saying that you can't make a compelling character study where you already know the punchline, where you already know the conclusion, as is the case for Joker. We know what's going to happen to the character, obviously. Right there, you're already kind of at a disadvantage when trying to recreate one of these anti-hero sort of stories, because a lot of your tension is gone. But in order to create that pathos, I think the key is just having really good writing. You need a really solid core story that is compelling and has emotion to it. And this film is hitting on all the points, but it's more going through the emotions for attention, seemingly, rather than really being interested in cohesive storytelling. And honestly, one thing that I felt during this movie that I was very surprised to feel was boredom. I really was quite bored during the movie. And I think a big reason why is there's not much of an arc happening here. Arthur begins in a very dark place, and he sort of remains on that level with certain spurts of violence that are aggravated within him. But this film it's of course a very different sort of portrait of the Joker character. It feels, though, like a kind of a propaganda piece for misunderstood people. It feels like an incel anthem. It is a movie about those within the system, creating the foundation of this society that feel misunderstood and rejected, and they slowly let that anger and resentment and whatever else to build until that system turns inside out. But the big problem here in that is that the main character, who is the cause of all of this chaos, and at least in the film, is that he is very rarely being tested. Arthur is constantly being bullied. He is being beaten down very literally, because there are no metaphors or anything in this film that are subtle. The narrative is just full of these really ham-fisted attempts at getting us to empathize with the Arthur character or sympathize with him. But I struggle to find that sympathy when it is kind of staying the same throughout, where things are constantly happening to him. He's not really having to make that many interesting decisions that test his morals, that potentially change his trajectory as a character. Whereas Travis Bickle, the reason he works and why there's so much tension there is because he's rooted in both worlds. So he's constantly trying to fight these notions and to fight the urges that he feels inside of him. He wants to reintegrate into society, at least on a basic level or a surface level. He tries to be the man that, you know, he thinks Betsy might want him to be, but all that does is just reveal kind of the pathetic truth and the loneliness and the sadness within him, and that is the tragedy. But no, she rejects him as a character, and that gives Travis kind of a springboard, a place for him to go, for a way for him to be motivated to go further. When you contrast this film with that one thing that I did notice is that a lot of the scenes kind of are confined in the same kind of psychological trappings. Each scene seems to be saying, poor Arthur, oh, poor Arthur, over and over and over again. And to compare it to Betsy and Travis, here you've got Arthur and Sophie, because he has a neighbor who is a single mother, and he fantasizes about being with her, being in some sort of relationship with her. But this whole relationship just feels like a device, and that's really all that it is. It is one note. There's nothing in this relationship that to me opened up his character in any interesting way, and I feel like this is your chance to really do that, to show the vulnerability, as you did with the Travis character. This is your chance to really have that genuine pathos that I'm craving here, have been craving while watching the movie, to give us so much more insight, and they just let it pass them by. I know a lot of you probably want to know what I thought about Joaquin Phoenix's performance and his portrayal of the Joker, because that seems to be quite a forced talking point for, you know, like Academy Award nominations and whatnot. And it's kind of a complicated answer. I mean, in terms of how I responded to his performance, I really love Joaquin Phoenix. I know a lot of people do. I think that he is just this really he's a risk taker. He's unrelenting, this force of nature. And he's made some very interesting films over the years, very varied choices, which is something that I personally respond to. But I wasn't quite convinced by this particular portrayal. He is, of course, interesting as a presence on screen. I think you'd kind of have to be crazy not to be interested in this guy and what he's doing. But the performance never really felt to me like a true marriage of a character and a performer. It felt like an actor being put in a role so that they could show off all their actory tricks and whatnot for award buzz. Physically, he is extraordinary how much he puts into the character. I mean, he dances quite well, I might add, and he bends and contorts his limbs in a way that are just really disturbing. His kind of hunched back. His face is just so gaunt and skeletal. It's very haunting. He commits to the performance and to the physicality, and therefore I don't really see, I mean, the fact that it missed the mark for me, I don't think that that's Joaquin Phoenix's fault. A lot of it is more he just wasn't given that much to work with, anything really gripping, again, that had a full arc, that had a process and payoff all the way through. When you're constantly trying to show the acting so hard and you're kind of throwing it in our face, after a while, it starts to feel boring and tiresome. I really do feel, and I'm not kidding when I say this, but I do feel like Brian Tyree Henry gave the best performance here. Shout out to Paperboy. It really was the most convincing and the most palatable in stark contrast to the Arthur character, which to me was necessary. It was needed, especially in that particular scene, in that part of the film. It's a very brief scene, but it worked. It worked because for the rest of the film, I feel so bombarded by it's like thematic aggression. I don't know if that's a phrase, but I'm coining it. But there's a lot going on here. And of course, you know, they're trying to have this really iconic performance, an iconic actor as the centerpiece to pull it all together. But there also has to be a backdrop to all of that kind of is like a catalyst for what's going on. And there is a lot of social and political conflicts and imagery. There are points when it started to get a little bit interesting. I can't talk too much about it because I don't want to get into spoiler territory, but it comes when they're starting to personify Arthur's relationship with Thomas Wayne. But again, all of that felt very ham-fisted and just so far in that direction to the point of caricature. I don't think this is a political film, and yet there is so much politics and all of that in it that you can't help but notice it, and you can't help but want those ideas to be fully fleshed out so that it assists and even maybe mirrors Arthur's arc as well. When I was about 17 or 18, I think, I was in high school, my senior year of high school, you know, we all had our period where we got obsessed with some sort of villain archetype, the Rogues Gallery, Batman, whatever. And, you know, that particular obsession happened with me at that age, where I became really obsessed with the Joker just as an archetype in modern fiction. And I wrote a really long essay. It was a typed essay. It was probably closer to 20 pages long. And I did a lot of research. I retain a little bit of that knowledge, but not that much because I'm old. But I looked at all of his different incarnations and all of the ways he's been portrayed, all through literature, all through movies and television. And the idea that you did see of Joker and his origin stories as being the failed comedian, I remember thinking, oh, that's interesting, because that's not something you see very often in terms of how it's portrayed in pop culture. You don't see it that often in any of the film. Well, you don't see that really in the films. You don't see that in the television shows either. But I remember thinking to myself at that age, like, oh, well, wouldn't that be interesting if they made kind of an anti-hero story where the Joker is the focus? How would someone go about that? How would I direct a movie? How would I write a story like that? That's a tough thing to do, to create a piece about a antagonist who is now the protagonist and how he got to the point of becoming this evil mastermind that we all know. And my answer there is that I wouldn't make such a film. And even back then, I kind of thought to myself, that kind of rubs me the wrong way. I don't like the idea of the Joker being a focal point of the film or any film. He works better as an antagonist, as the antithesis of what Batman represents. He is an abstraction, a symbol for anarchy that disrupts Bruce's very difficult climb towards morality. He's always kind of skirting the edge. I like when he's a mysterious character. I like Heath Ledger's portrayal so much. I love, like the Mark Hamill, like the animated series and all of that, because you don't know that much about the characters, or, it is up to all kinds of different interpretations. And I'm not saying, again, that it's impossible to make a compelling Joker story like that. It's just that I feel like you already have such an uphill battle. More important than anything, you need a much better script than this. That isn't so on the nose metaphorically, where they're playing stuff like Send in the Clowns and Smile. One that isn't so sloppy in its execution, where you actually kind of get an idea of what the film's trying to say. That isn't so pretentious and full of ego. I admire the ambition of it, as I've said, but not much beyond that. And that is my review. Thank you all for listening. All of my social media information is below. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you want to. Catch you next time.